about the story itself. So Rob, just to kind of get some clarification and just I guess some reference as well. What could you just kind of I guess give us an introduction of the story?
Yeah. Yeah. So the story is called Game Theory. Okay. In the book, I lay out, a couple of things I'm consciously touching on and referencing and pulling on. But the idea is that life is a grand game. You might say that the infinite plays the video game of life. It's like a Ready Player One thing, but uh, God's player one, right? And then uh, the game of life is his creation. Um, so, and you could take this a couple other ways too, but the idea is that we are in the midst of a story, a movie, a game. And the main point of the story is thinking about and trying to understand how we could see a positive relationship between the director of the events or the programmer of the game and the characters of the story who go through things where you're like, I mean, why why is this something where why is this one of the storylines? Like, why is this a quest line? This kind of sucks, or this really sucks, or this is, actually hellish and unmanageable. Um, I meant to say unimaginable, but unmanageable works as well. So that's the setup. Is we're introducing this idea, and then we're trying to address the the feeling of suffering, the dislike of suffering, and the fact that there is suffering, and that we live in a fallen world. I think that's another one of those things, like the idea of a soul, regardless of whether you're Christian now or not Christian now, or any of the cultures in the past that weren't Christian. Everyone had to have this approach to talking about life in their mythology of why are things so messed up? Why does it suck so much of the time? Um, and so we have this sense of like things aren't as they should be, or things aren't as they could be, maybe. And what's up with that? Like, why can't we fix it? Why doesn't it just go back to how it should be? Was it ever how it should be? What stopped it from being? So all those questions imply this sense that things are off. So we clearly recognize that things are off. So how then, as especially as modern people, if we're coming back around, many people in the atheist community come back around to the idea of God and basically are just, see nothing but reasons for anger at him. Like, why would we worship a God who allows child sex trafficking or whatever it is? And that's a good question, So this story is meant to be a story, first of all. It's intentionally a story, and then but it's an attempt to engender that spirit that maybe could answer that question, that type of perspective, that sense of understanding where you could go, oh, I kind of get that, or that kind of makes some more sense.
And I think it's in this part. That might be in the second. That might be in the second where you discuss the question isn't necessarily why do we suffer, but how do we ease suffering?
Yes, yeah. So that's where it starts out. So, or I'd say that's the second step. The first step is the idea that the infinite, the perspective that the infinite has on life is both from the view of the outside looking in, like someone reading a comic book or watching a movie or playing a video game, sort of the bird's eye view or the third person view, you might say, third person omniscient, but it also an intimate personal perspective of looking out from the eyes of a character and understanding that perspective too. So that's an idea that I'm floating out there. Okay, that's some of the capacities that the infinite has in terms of its consciousness and its ability to understand what's going on in our game. Okay. And then as it's going through this view, if it comes across a character who has this lament, I mean, one of the books of the Bible is Lamentations. Many of the Psalms are these cries out of pain and suffering. I mean, Jesus on the cross is praying one of the Psalms that starts off, my God, why have you forsaken me? And this is in the Bible. This is in a Psalm because this is a regular experience that we have. So then the idea is, how does God answer someone who's crying out like that? And we actually have, again, in the Bible, we have an example of Job's having a terrible time and he's crying out to God. And basically, when God finally answers, he's like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm way bigger than you and you can't even possibly comprehend me. So just stop it. Like that's not uh, it's not an answer of like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll make it all okay. It's just like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. Stop it. So, but when we think about that separate from the story and consider it intellectually and analyze it and try to psychologize God, then we come up, well, that's a terrible answer. And boy, like, it's probably a different experience to actually be in the presence of God and have him tell you the obvious truth that you don't know what you're talking about, and he does. But anyhow, that's not something that people it doesn't click for people. So and God would know this. So if God's going through this game and he finds someone crying out, what's he supposed to do? What can you say to the person? And that's what you were talking about, where there's this idea of the person's crying out and saying, why do we suffer? Well, there's not really an answer for that because any answer is going to any direct answer to that is going to include the presuppositions of that question of suffering is terrible. I don't want to suffer, and I can't bear this, and I shouldn't have to bear that. Whatever endless list of things, um, which are important from our perspective, but again, we have a limited perspective. So to try to reach us on that level would be to concede to us maybe too much. And so in the story, I propose a couple ideas of like, well, let's say we're playing a video game and we're an avatar, we're a character wandering around, and we're like, hey, wait a minute, this sucks. Like, I don't know. For me, it's a big game was Halo or Skyrim.
Yeah.
Like, just imagine that you were uh whatever your character in Skyrim, and suddenly you became self-aware, and you're like wandering through a dungeon, picking through bones for like weird objects, and
Huh.
there's like zombie skeletons running at you, and you're almost dying, and like I don't want to do this. This is not fun, you know? So, like, what would you say if your character just turned around on the screen? If let's pretend you didn't freak out and were like, "Is this a dream or a drug trip or something?" But if your character turns around and is like, "Hey, I don't know why we're doing this, but I don't want to play this game," you'd just be like, this is the game we're playing. Like, what are you talking about? This is the game. Like, we do this stuff and we're getting stuff. You're going to be fine. I've got the potions. I've got you saved. We can go back if you die. Like, we're good, you know? But from his point of view in the game, he's like, this isn't fun, you know? So, so there's not really a direct way to answer that question. Um, so then I think what we have to realize is while we might formulate it intellectually, people make all sorts of arguments about how God can't be both all good and all powerful because of how terrible the world is. But I don't think the question of why do we suffer or why is there suffering or why does God allow suffering, whatever variation of it is, I don't think that that's actually an intellectual question. We can use our intellect to make it appear so, but I think it's actually a expression of dismay. It's an emotional expression of basically saying this isn't fair. I don't like this. You're just expressing this attitude of rejecting the darkness of the world and objecting to being involved with it, being put through it, or whatever combination of the two. Um, so we we can't answer that question. Why is there suffering? We can offer, a hypothesis, a short story of saying, well, actually, they're suffering because but you chose to be here or whatever it is, and you knew ahead of time, you gave consent, and that's the soul idea. Your soul knew ahead of time, you gave consent, and now you're here and you don't remember that, but uh, that's how it is. And then, well, you can either believe that or not. But again, I still think what's happening is we're trying to answer on the intellectual level what is just an emotional cry. And I don't think that's the appropriate way to do it. So the best question to answer is, hey, here's the best thing that you can do in this situation. Here's the way forward. Here's the most practical steps. And here's the hope at the end of the line that you should keep in mind because it's there with you all along and it'll get you through. It's about, okay, like you had your little moment of despair, you know, pat you on the butt and keep you on, just push you toddling along the path some more. Just a reminder, okay, here's the things that you're doing. Go continue doing them. So I think that's really the appropriate answer to give. And then so the story is about the infinite sort of narrating that or coming to that decision that this is the appropriate answer to give, not a direct answer to the question, but here's what we need to do. Here's how we're gonna move forward in spite of the fact that it sucks sometimes or most of the time, whatever it might be. And so that leads us to the next part of the story.
It's like instead of just giving somebody a fish, you give them a fishing rod and teach them how to fish.